Hey everybody, it's Khara Crossley Brindle back with another video. I have Ashley with us again. Hey Ashley.
Hey.
So this video on our new grad series is all about the importance of fit in supervision. So we're going to talk about things to ask, things to think about. But first, to start us off, Ashley, I'm going to put you in the hot seat. What is
Mhm.
one word you would use to describe your supervision experience so far?
One word, looking back when I was a supervisee, I would say lucky.
Hmm.
My supervisor at my first job after I graduated with my MSW, he was an LCSW and I had supervision included at my job. And I didn't realize at the time that that on-site built-in supervision, it's not always offered. And
Right.
now, as someone who provides supervision today to early career social workers in those types of agency settings, I'm realizing more and more that this is not common and this is not usually offered. I
Yeah.
also say lucky because he was spot on clinically. He was regularly available. He asked me to identify issues of transference and countertransference, and I would describe him as generally pretty supportive. I didn't necessarily use those terms, countertransference and transference, at the time, but he very consciously and purposefully checked in on how clients made me feel and
Right.
how I thought I impacted clients with my therapeutic style. I gained a lot of experience that I'm starting to realize not a lot of early career therapists get. And again, I'm very lucky because this supervisor really set me up for success. Um, what about you? What was your first supervision experience like?
Yeah, well, for viewers who are like, that sounds wonderful. Lucky Ashley, lucky
Mhm.
supervisor, amazing. Not so much on this side, which is probably why we love talking about this, right? Like, I love
Yeah,
talking
for
to
sure.
colleagues about quality supervision because it's not what I had. So, my word probably would be questionable. That's the one that
Mm.
came up as soon as you asked me this today. Like, questionable.
Yeah, that
Uh,
doesn't sit well with me now that you say it.
no, I know, right? So like, why? Why is that a thing? So for people who don't know me, I've been sharing this more lately. But my first supervision experience was in grad school, right? Versus the first job. My first job experience was phenomenal. And now that
Okay.
person, Christina
Mhm.
Murphy, is my business partner. So that tells you how great she was. But my first actual experience with supervision, what made it questionable is that my supervisor didn't have good boundaries. And so there
Mm.
was this violation feeling for me of like, are you my supervisor? Are you my therapist? Like, why are you asking me these really like personal questions when
Mhm.
it didn't feel connected to the work, right? There's absolutely a place for supervisors to say, hey, you've disclosed you're going through something personally. How do you think that
Right.
affects your clients?
Mhm.
Perfect question. That is not what I experienced.
Okay.
In a nutshell, this person's like, Khara, you're too composed, you're too stoic, we want you to cry. I was like,
Oh my gosh.
the more I share that, that's the genuine reaction I usually get is like, what the
Mhm.
heck?
Mhm.
So I'm not sure what the intention was with those questions, other than the reflection I got yesterday and talking to a colleague as they were trying to mold me into somebody that they wanted as
Mhm.
a clinician, versus allowing me to grow and change the way I want to. So yeah, questionable is the word for me. So anyone watching this video, if you are more on my side of the experience, I am with you in that. If you are more relating to Ashley's experience, I am so happy to hear that genuinely. So this is why we're having this video because we're like, what should we be asking to make sure
Mhm.
there's a fit? So on that note, Ashley, now that I've thrown that bomb at you, what are you
Yeah.
thinking about that people should be asking for supervision fit or supervisor compatibility?
Yeah, maybe I'm biased here because I did have such a good experience, but making sure your supervisor has good clinical skills and good clinical judgment. And can they teach that? And can
Mm-hmm.
they provide that safe and supportive environment for you to maybe try something new with your
Right.
therapeutic style or try a new evidence-based clinical skill or share your own feelings about clients? I also think someone who's generally available and supportive is also a requirement. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
supervisees shouldn't be calling their supervisor every day or for every crisis. But I do think there's a certain level of, hey, this happened. I need someone to check in with. How can we carve out some time in the near future before our next scheduled
Mm-hmm.
session so I can move through whatever I need to move through? Um, because I think what happens sometimes is supervision happens in silo. You know, it's once
Mm-hmm.
every week or every other week or every month. and then we dump everything in 1 hour, and then we're supposed to be good between
Right.
sessions. And that's generally not the reality.
Right. Especially I'm thinking of like the populations we serve as a new
Mhm.
grad professional, right? Like we're more likely to be in community mental health centers or agencies in that kind of like
Right.
setting where there might be more stuff going on, for lack of
Mhm.
a better way to put it. Of like, now I need to run this by someone, especially if you and I can acknowledge that we don't know what we don't know as green
Mhm.
clinicians. So
Absolutely.
having someone who is readily available, even if it's, hey, can I have a quick phone call? Can I shoot you a quick
Mhm.
email? Something that creates that support between the scheduled meetings makes sense to me. Absolutely.
And overall, the goal is for supervisees to move towards being independent and competent over time. The goal is for them to be autonomous therapists. And so we, as supervisors, have an obligation to support them from needing a lot of support to needing little support in their
Mm-hmm.
practice. And going off of that, supervisees need to be able to ask themselves, how available do I need my supervisor to be? Again, like you said, this might depend on the setting. If
Mm-hmm.
the supervisee sees acute clients and does a lot of crisis management or assessing safety or safety planning, they might need a supervisor who's more available for check-ins
Right.
or more available for, hey, I need someone on call because I work with clients who are actively suicidal or actively unsafe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so really like taking in the clientele we're serving and then trying to translate that into how much time can I estimate that I need from my
Mhm.
supervisor? How available are they? So questions like, how many supervisees do they have on their caseload right now?
Yes,
That's a
great
question I
question.
would want to ask.
Mhm.
If you've got 15, which is what I had as a community
Mhm.
mental health supervisor, one, I was burning out and had no boundaries because they were calling at all times of the week and all times of day. And that was because of the clientele we were serving. So it wasn't even that
Great.
they didn't have boundaries with me. It was, there was always something happening.
Mhm.
So that could be a question. How many supervisees do you have? Is there a
Yeah.
number that feels more congruent with the person interviewing them to say, I get a weird feeling when you say you have 20 versus you say you have five. Do you have
Mhm.
space for me kind of thing?
Mhm.
So maybe that's one question. What else would they ask, do you think?
I would encourage supervisees to reflect on their personality and ask themselves, like, what do I want and what do I need? Do they need someone who's firm, who's going to have a certain level of accountability? I'm thinking of some supervisees who their strengths are not completing administrative tasks or notes. And do they need to use that supervision time to ask for help with this and for
Mm-hmm.
someone to do more frequent check-ins of, hey, are your DAP notes done? Are your treatment plans done?
Yeah.
Another question I would ask is, how does the supervisor provide feedback? And supervisees need to be open to feedback, both
Mm-hmm.
positive feedback, what's going well, but also critical feedback and, some prompting for introspection and growth and oosh, maybe I could have done something differently there. And
Right.
so I would encourage supervisees to ask a potential supervisor, how do you deliver feedback?
Hmm. And even how often, because that's another
Yeah.
part of that question is like, is this a
Mhm.
one and done, like start and end of supervision? Which for folks
Mhm.
pursuing licensure is a minimum of 2 years on the LPC side. I can't speak to social work side, but like
Yep. Same
that's a
here.
long commitment, right? Of
Yeah.
like, if I only have two evaluations in a span of 2 years, that might not feel very supportive or
Mhm.
enlightening. Versus, are we doing this, once a year, once a quarter, once a month? What feels right? And is that in alignment with what the supervisee wants?
Mhm.
So I can see that. I'm also thinking about like where supervision is taking place. So is this a
Yeah.
telehealth, telesupervision thing? Is this a
Mhm.
in person? It sounds like you agree with that being a question to ask of like how is supervision delivered?
Absolutely. And I think similarly, is the supervisee looking for group or individual supervision? There's
Mhm.
pros and cons to both.
Right.
And does the supervisor use a different style or strategy one on one versus in a group? And how do they manage, 5 to 10 supervisees in a group setting? Does everyone get to talk? Does everyone get to share? Are case presentations a requirement? Is it more
Mhm.
of, hey, we present a topic and discuss every week? And so group supervision, I would argue, is a totally different conversation almost.
Yeah, yeah, and what that looks like and what that results in. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. So yeah, I mean, obviously we're thinking of like questions that the supervisor can ask. I imagine there's also questions around like credentials, experience as
Yeah.
a supervisor. So beyond how many people are you supervising, maybe it's how long have you been supervising and what are your credentials, something like that.
Yeah. And a question would be, do you need your supervisee to be in the same area of practice as you? And
Mhm.
similarly, does the supervisee need the supervisor to be in the same area of practice as them? Um, I can generally provide supervision to most areas of the field, but with more complex cases, sometimes I might not be the right person to ask for advice or ask for more direction. And so if I'm working with a supervisee, what does it look like if I don't know the answer to something and I need to find it pretty quickly for the supervisee that I'm working with? I love the question about how long have you been supervising? What training and experience do you have? I think supervising interns is very different than supervising, postmasters
Mhm.
therapists as well. With interns, the supervisor has more support. Usually the student is in class, usually there's a
Right.
field liaison, the school's there. And so there's less liability and more people involved in that supervisee's growth.
Mhm.
Whereas there's a lot more liability and it's typically just you if you're the one supervising a postmaster's therapist.
Yeah. And I imagine kind of cross-referencing both supervisor and supervisee. There's a question in my head popping up of like, is the supervision clinical, administrative,
Mhm.
or both? Right. So like when we're
Right.
thinking about interns and what they need, they have a lot more of an administrative in the sense of we have hours we have to accumulate,
Mhm.
we have paperwork we have to learn how to do, intakes how to complete. Postmasters, there might be less onboarding effort to supervise that person because they have a master's degree. But then it's also like, am I providing both clinical and administrative or one over
Right.
the other? Or is there someone else involved? Because sometimes folks
Mhm.
have multiple supervisors.
Exactly. And something else I want to just note for social workers, there's no education or training experience required to be a supervisor. You can
Mm,
supervise the day you have your LCSW currently. The statute has changed over time, but I
right.
know for LPCs, you guys have a different sort of requirement. And so
We do.
recognizing that from degree to degree or licensure to licensure, the logistics also vary.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of that is a disclosure statement that says all of the things we've named so far of like training experience,
Mhm.
credentials, degrees, like basically the same kind of document we give to a client. We're giving it in the lens of supervision to our supervisee. So obviously, Ashley and I are speaking specific to Colorado. Each state has different parameters of how this looks. But in Colorado, licensed professional counselors need to have 3 years of experience postmasters. So that's including 2 years to get licensed. Then a year after that, they could potentially set up shop as a supervisor. And at that point, they have to have 6 hours of training in supervision specific, as well as that disclosure statement. And then every license renewal period, 3 more hours of continued education specific to supervision. So I sat in all those long meetings back in 2021. I heard all of the arguments for more training hours, for less training hours. 6 hours of training was the compromise because we were trying to support community mental health agencies who are promoting clinicians after licensure, but then
Mhm.
also trying to say, like, here's a parameter to say, like, this person's committed to providing quality supervision versus I'm just setting up shop. So I imagine all of this will evolve and change, but that's what we know as of right now at the time of this
Yep.
recording.
Yep, I agree. I agree. Constantly evolving for sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like for a supervisee to potentially interview different supervisors, I mean, this is also a privilege. Sometimes you're just assigned a supervisor. So,
Right.
like some of these questions,
Absolutely.
regardless of how they answer them, it's just information. It's not, I get to choose to work with you or I don't. But it sounds like it'd be helpful for them to write out some other questions, come prepared, interview supervisors if that is something they can do, and then, determine fit based on those responses. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Yes.
Hmm. So obviously, there's probably way more questions than what we've put in this video, or things that you might put on your Q&A with your interview. Any final thoughts, though, for our viewers as supervisees, new grads going in to this process?
Again, this is specific to Colorado, but supervision is basically required if you're
Hmm.
practicing mental health in our state. You have to be registered with the Department of Regulatory Agencies or DORA. Again, depending on your degree or role, there's different options for you to register as different LPCC, MFTC, SWC, and LSW. If you're registered as one of those, there's specific rules, guidelines, and timeframes surrounding licensure. And I encourage master's level people to pursue licensure because we have to be registered and we have to have supervision in order to practice mental health services here in Colorado. So moving towards independent licensure also helps with future career opportunities. And so the supervision piece is just one component of licensure requirements.
Right, right. And I know you and I also talked offline about the importance of just because you get licensed doesn't mean supervision has to stop unless you want it to. But like
Yeah.
some of us still pursue consultation if that's what we need for support or to run something by someone who has a specialty that maybe we're trying to figure out a fit for clients, but also like where are limits of education or knowledge to help that client versus a referral out. So by no means is it like supervision and then you're off on your own and that's it. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that could be how it looks if you don't pursue any other kind of support or networking. But I know you and I talked offline about there is still the place for consultation if needed. It's kind of what we're thinking about. Obviously, we encourage anyone watching this video to come up with your own list of questions. There's probably more questions you're thinking about from this video, which is our whole intention for new grads taking this in. But join us for our next video. We'll see you there as we talk more about the challenges of private practice and some things to consider. We'll see you then.